The second conversation today is around how do we future-proof Bharat by getting resilient infrastructure. Infrastructure that can survive disasters, that can actually survive the kind of climate change that we are seeing around us. Infrastructure that can outlive all of us. Panelists in the previous session mentioned about how we need to build infrastructure for our next and the generation after that as well. All at the same time meeting our climate goals. India wishes to be a climate leader for the world. To do that, we need to ensure that our infrastructure also meets the kind of climate commitments that we have put out and set a roadmap for. All this and more, along with ensuring that it makes perfect business sense. At the end of the day, India's green journey needs to map out in terms of how it adds up from a business point of view. And that's exactly what this discussion is going to be. It's a power-packed panel I have with me. We have experts, analysts, activists, and of course, those from the field of business as well. Let me introduce my panelist, Mr. Rekhi Cage. He's a 3-time Grammy Award winner, composer, and environmentalist. Mr. Amit Singh, CEO of Adani Green Energy. G. Raghuram, former director of IIM Bangalore. Ms. Anumita Roy Chaudhary, Executive Director, Research and Advocacy for Center for Science and Environment. And Mr. Vinayak Chatterjee, InfraVision Foundation Head. Thank you so much to all of you for being part of this discussion. My first question, in fact, as I said, which is around that it needs to make perfect business sense at the end of the day. And Amit, let's start with that when you talk about India's green journey, sir, at the end of the day, it needs to make sense from a business point of view, from a financial point of view, from an investor point of view. So there is, of course, there's generation, there's consumption, but how do we ensure that we get to the kind of goals that we've made for ourselves as a nation, as a society, and of course, from a generation point of view as well?
Yeah, look, if you look at today's Indian consumer, and compare it and contrast it to US or China, our consumers are consuming 1/10 of electricity today. And if you look at the potential in our country and the growth of power demand in our country, we just exceeded 250 gigawatt of peak demand. So a huge surge of electricity demand is coming our way. And looking at what's happening around us in terms of increase in temperature and all the climate-related, manifestations we are seeing in atmosphere conditions, it's important that the sources of electricity become green. Where we are and where we need to get to, we need to make some big and bold steps. We need to work on mega-scale projects. And in Adani Green, we have actually embarked on one of that mega-scale project in Khavda, where we are going to put together a 30 gigawatt scale project, which will be commissioned over the next few years. This will be the biggest project in the world from a renewable plant perspective or any kind of power plant perspective. And frankly, for India to deliver and meet its ambitions, many more such initiatives have to be put into play. While we are improving and growing our generation capacity, we also need to look at renewable power by nature is intermittent in nature. We also need to develop other sources of storage, whether it is pump storage, battery storage, and also look at harnessing the wind power, which is available in abundance in different parts of India. So a lot of investment needs to go in strengthening our grid infrastructure across the country. We need to be getting better at energy efficiency. I heard some of the members talk about it just a little earlier. And together, I believe if we keep doing what we are focusing and targeting, we will be able to achieve the net zero targets which we have set for ourselves. So huge opportunity for our nation to change the paradigm and really take advantage of what's happening in the tech sector as well.
Absolutely. And Mr. Chatterjee, if I may come to you on the fact that India has massive infrastructure requirements, whether it's in the field of energy, transportation, urbanization requirements that we have. We're looking at the next 30, 40 years really being a game changer for us in terms of setting ourselves on a developed country path, all at the same time having our green concerns as well. So as someone who's been in this field for the last 4 decades or so, how do you see our journey the next 4-5 years, and what would you be looking at in terms of advising policymakers for the next couple of key decisions that the government or the country needs to take?
Thank you. Popular perceptions of resilient infrastructure bring some images to the mind.
Yes.
That global warming should not raise water levels, that some cities, in some cases, countries do not disappear. The fact that we should not make roads through tiger reserves, that we should not cut too many trees to build a new industrial park.
Absolutely.
These are popular images of, or we should not sanction projects where cracks appear in the Joshimart buildings. These are popular perceptions of grappling with resilient infrastructure.
Yes.
So in terms of policymakers, there are two suggestions I have, and I'll keep it short. One is that India is burdened with fairly large historical installations of infrastructure. Let me give you an example. India has the largest number of dams. How often does anybody think about dams? You don't. Yes. You probably visit one or two as a tourism destination. But India has the third largest number of dams in the world. But wonder of wonders, 63% of them are more than 100 years old. They're built during British times. And their structural strength has fallen. Now, if you have 63% of 7,000 dams, which are 100 years old and structurally inconsistent, you got a major problem on your hands.
Absolutely.
And in Parliament, it was said that there have been 42 instances of dam collapse. And the World Bank now has a program called DRIPS, which is to take a look at some of the dams, and many of the dams now actually have to be retired. So what is going to happen to those reservoirs? Now, the point I'm making is whether they're railway footbridges, or whether they are tunnels, or whether they are dams, there is a large number of historical infrastructure in India which is from colonial times. So the advice to policymakers first is that we should have some kind of a very strong technical inspection teams to see that footbridges don't collapse, that railway tunnels don't collapse, that cracks don't appear in buildings like in the hills in Joshimart or in Shimla or Dehradun. That's one policy intervention that is sorely required now. The second point I want to make is that India does not have a sustainability index. We have ratings on ESG, which you will find in all corporate balance sheets now. Now, that's fine, because you get brownie points for rising up the scale on your ESG ratings. But we do not have a sustainability rating. And I'm now going to do a little bit of marketing for a particular project that we have done, which I'm very proud of, in the InfraVision Foundation, which is to develop a 102-point index of a sustainability index. Professor Raghuram is on our governing council, and he knows how deep we have gone in the subject. We have developed 102 criteria of definition of resilient infrastructure across various dimensions. And I'm not listing them out for you, but it goes from the method of construction to the green that it demolishes, etc., 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 or the water it uses, or what it does to the community. Now, we have a sustainability index of 102 parameters, which policymakers should use now. And we have tried to propagate it with the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Commission, with Niti Aayog, with NABFID and others, to say, can we propagate the India-specific sustainability index? And I hope to enthuse Mr. Pugalia, you're sitting here. I hope to share this document with you in NDTV so that you may take a call as to whether it's a campaign worth taking on. That India should have its own homegrown sustainability index by which policymakers decide first whether to sanction a project or not. After you've sanctioned a project, it's too late. But should we have, for example, a major highway being built in the eco-sensitive, fragile Himalayan ranges right up to the highest levels? I'm obviously not taking the names of towns. Should you sanction such a project? So issues like these should pass through the test of the sustainability index for policy makers to judge first whether the country should actually have that project or let it pass. So it's a complex subject, and I'm going to stop here to offer these two suggestions to the House today. Thank you.
In fact, both are very valid and important points. What do we do about our legacy infrastructure? We can, of course, make amends when we start afresh, but what do we do about our legacy infrastructure and about the sustainability index? And I want to take your views, in fact, on both these issues, which are most important, Professor Raghuram as well as Anumita on this, that what do we do about our existing infrastructure and also about the sustainability index that Mr. Chatterjee spoke about?
Absolutely. So if you really think, if there is some takeaway from the summer that we have just, experienced, first, the persistent heat wave, and then unprecedented flood. What it's telling us, and that's a message, that climate change, which is real, that's constant, but we cannot keep blaming climate change all the time, keeping in mind the way infrastructure is taking shape today that aggravates and compounds the impact if we do not get the blueprint right. And it's all about getting the blueprint right so that cities need not be a bad word, but cities can be part of the solution. If keeping in mind again that we are told all the time that most of the growth, the infrastructure growth that we are all talking about today, that the most of it still lies in the future in India, that we have not grown to the extent we would grow in future. That means it's an opportunity if we do it right. If not, then it's a disaster. So from that perspective, so 3 takeaways that how can we therefore do and build for resilience and for mitigation. Clearly, as we are all saying that, so one is the whole housing and the built environment, which is going to expand phenomenally. We have just heard about Government of India's big program, Housing for All, but we also have a program, India's Cooling Action Plan, which says that thermal comfort for all. This is absolutely important in an era when we are going to get hit by heat wave. But the issue is that are we really building for thermal comfort? Because when you go down to the ground, you realize that a lot of prescriptions and the rules that we already have for ventilation, daylighting, material, that will actually help to reduce the thermal load and the heat load on the buildings to make us more comfortable, to reduce the air-conditioned hours, we often do not meet them. So it's important that we do that right. Second, we are talking about floods. We are talking about choosing material so that we can reduce the heat island effect. This summer, when we went out with the infrared thermometers, and we actually measured the temperature of the granite pavements. And under the sun, the temperature would hit 60 degrees when the grass-paved areas were just about 40. Now, this kind of data has to inform infrastructure design and development, the material that we are selecting today. Similarly, understand that we just have seen about the water crisis in Bangalore, water crisis in Delhi. But why? Because the master plan of Delhi is saying that if we had improved the water storage in Delhi, then almost 900 billion of water could have been, it has the potential. And if at least 25% of that can be done, and we stored that, then that can help us to meet the shortfall. But where is the design for that, especially looking at Bangalore, which originally had more than 1,400 lakes for water storage, has dwindled to just about 198, and with massive reduction. So clearly, therefore, what it means that while we are growing, that how do we grow well and not use, for instance, not just use come out of the conventional approach of planning as well, that do not look at stormwater drain for 100% water to be drained out of the city, but change the draining concept in such a way that you recharge, you conserve, and keep most of the water inside the city. So my final takeaway is that we have to understand this and understand how to therefore build these indicators in our infrastructure planning to minimize impacts, build resilience, and mitigate, and be inclusive. Because when we map out the heat-prone areas and the flood-prone areas in the city, that's where the maximum poor people live. So clearly that creates and gives us the agenda that how do we need to build and construct for the new normal.
Absolutely. And while ensuring that there's a more scientific approach towards handling some of these issues, one sees policy making, it is still a work in progress. There is not so much of a technological solution that is applied to it. And in the wake of that, in the wake of these legacy issues, in the wake of some of the concerns that Mr. Chatterjee raised also, Professor Raguraman, do you think that when you talk about standardization, disaster codes, those building standards that are kind of being made right now, it's still a work in progress. So how do we ensure that there is better standardization, better codes being made to ensure that we can minimize some of the impacts that is being talked about? We can't eliminate it, we can hope to minimize it.
Yeah, I mean, building on what Vinayak said about looking at existing infrastructure, definitely, I mean, I think to an extent it is, say, colonial infrastructure, so the age factor. I'm sure he also implied not only the age factor, but the way the environment is changing, higher, greater variation in temperatures, more water, I mean, more flooding. So maybe not only examine existing infrastructure from the requirements that the climate change would impose, even new infrastructure that we are planning to construct, what are the standards? And would these standards stand the test of the climate impact, which we have already caused? Because climate impact takes decades, and there is going to be whatever we are seeing. So, for example, the tar on the roads, would they sustain consistent 50 degrees centigrade direct sun hit on it? Welded rails, which are pre-stressed, will they withstand the kind of temperatures or the water or whatever it is that would cause them to deteriorate maybe faster than was originally thought of? So I think all this is going to need attention. Technology can come in. Maybe we need a lot of sensors, ability to monitor. We will need better governance. We will need people who are charged with the responsibility of looking at this, which I don't think the relevant infrastructure institutions today think through. So I think there is this whole issue of standards and monitoring for standards. I think there is another important issue which is more of a moral, ethical concern in India, and that is we may have standards, but what is our execution? The plan execution gap. And some of the disasters that we've been having, take that game room in Rajkot, that, where the fire came in, and, obviously people don't follow codes. I mean, I could have good, so first is, do I have the right codes? But even if I have that, so take Ahmedabad as a city, until the earthquake, it was accepted that people will violate building codes. I mean, I'm sorry, we had our real estate friend in the earlier panel, but I think we were waiting for a disaster like the earthquake, where compliance with codes in Ahmedabad has definitely increased. And the new Ahmedabad that's coming up, growing around, is far more compliant. So we have standards, we have, dealing with the issue of execution. And I think a third aspect we need to worry about is bringing in innovation in an inclusive way. And for that, for example, R&D. I think infrastructure has grown in India to such an extent that we need to start having fundamental solutions, many times bottom up. Academic institutions have to be brought in. Maybe manufacturers have to be brought in. I mean, take the example of railways. I don't think enough R&D gets done. Maybe today we have brought in manufacturers, giving them some leeway to come up with their own designs. But we just need a lot more fundamental R&D. Corporates, I mean, I've been saying the Adani Group is now so widely set up in different domains of infrastructure that they could very well invest in fundamental R&D and create knowledge that will enable future-proofing of infrastructure. Just to give an example, because Adani Green, if we want future-proofing infrastructure, I'm looking at solar. solar panels are coming on surfaces. Now, India is a country that can ill afford giving up surface for solar panels. I don't know, the largest solar park is coming up. It's right on the surface. Should we be doing some R&D and actually see whether we can raise the panels up so that the Earth's surface is available for some alternate use? What about all the solar panels on rooftop? The rooftop is also valuable. And like, for example, in our society, the rooftop used to, hold, we could hold parties. Today we can't because the society said we're going to go for solar. And the rooftop is all gone.
Absolutely.
So I think the third aspect I want to bring in is that of innovation, where we worry about the Indian context.
Yes. In fact, I'm going to come to technology in just a bit about, identifying India-centric solutions to these problems. But before that, I want to get in Ricky as well. You've been a very passionate voice when it comes to raising issues related to climate change, how it impacts and disproportionately impacts the poor. And the fact that we are having these conversations is testimony to the fact that at least we are now recognizing the problem, addressing it. There is greater awareness about it. Through your music, you've raised that awareness. What next is the frontier that you want to capture through your music?
So first of all, I'm going to take the conversation a little bit tangentially.
Absolutely.
And I believe that, the words development and the words infrastructure have been pretty much hijacked simply because I believe that development by its own definition should be in collaboration with the environment. But nowadays, when we think about development, the only thing we think about is concretization, New York skyline, and roads and infrastructure and things like that. And we've got a separate term for sustainable development, which is good development, when it should be the opposite, that development by itself should be sustainable development, and we should have a separate term for, unsustainable or irresponsible development. So an example for that is basically, in my role as being a United Nations Goodwill Ambassador, especially working with the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, I've been quite involved in this project known as the Great Green Wall. Now, the Great Green Wall is a collaboration between the African Union, the European Union, and the World Bank. And what it essentially is that it's basically infrastructure. And it is creating a green mosaic belt all the way from Senegal in the west to Djibouti in the east. It's in the Sahel region. And it's about 18 kilometers 15 to 18 kilometers in thickness, and the length of the entire infrastructure is about, I think it's about 8,000 kilometers, and about 18% of it is ready, which is about 18 million hectares of land, and which has been completely green. And this is pretty amazing because it is going to serve generations and generations, number one. And number two is that it's going to help in climate resilience, especially when it comes to the effects of climate change, that is, desertification, drought, and it's going to help in retaining water. It's going to help in bringing back biodiversity, helping in sustainable livelihoods for people. It's going to help in jobs and things like that. And also adding to what Professor said just now, that I did this concert I think it was in 2016. I did this concert at the Javits Center in New York. And what I loved about that concert was that the Javits Center itself has got a roof which is about 7 acres large. And they'd taken me on a tour of that particular roof, and they'd completely greened the entire roof. And there were trees, there were shrubs, there was vegetation over there, and it was quite amazing because there were 50 species of bird that had made their home, the roof of the Javits Center. And also there were 5 species of bats over there, and it also helped in insulating the structure. So they had to use much less energy to warm the Javits Center during winter and to cool the Javits Center during summer. And of course, it also helped, mitigate the use of storm drains because it would collect rainwater and it would also retain rainwater. So I believe that we have to look at infrastructure as not just being concretization, but also infrastructure which is natural infrastructure.
Indeed, and I think this is the kind of steps and the roadmap that we are hoping to sort of carve out here. One of the interesting things that I think Professor Raghuram mentioned was about the need for identifying solutions given the constraints that India has. I remember, Amit, when we spoke prior to this panel, you talked about the need to identify areas which do not, or solutions that do not require that much land as one of the reasons that we need to work on. So when we talk about India-centric solutions, the kind of tech breakthroughs that we need to identify, the kind of skill gaps that we need to address, how would you like to come in on that point? And then I get in Mr. Chatterjee as well on it.
Sure. So I think if you look at where we are and where we are going forward, I think it's important we recognize the kind of skills which are needed in the next few years and what kind of technology gaps which we need to kind of address. And I'm an engineer myself. I did 25 years ago. But if you're an engineer entering college, I think you have to future-proof against AI. You need to have a better understanding of how the renewable power is going to change our ecosystem around us. And there are two things which I would say a young person or a mid-career person needs to look at in developing a skill set. First is manufacturing. India is going to massively scale up manufacturing. That's the way to go. That will underpin the growth in our country and also in renewable sector and infrastructure. So understanding the manufacturing process, having that vocational skill and the technical skills to be able to work in a plant and have that high quality output will differentiate both the manufacturing sector of India, but also make sure that provides a more sustainable career growth. And the second skill set, which will become very important, is understanding technology, especially digital technology. I think it's important that digital is pervasive across everything we do. It has to become part and parcel of how we do projects. Understanding digital tools, making sure that we are able to use the advantages which are implicit into real-life applications to improve productivity is going to really become a core differentiation and core requirement for our sector. Talking about technology and solutions you talked about, I think if you look at where we are, I mean, our supply chain today is not localized. We are still importing a lot of capital goods from outside the country. We are still depending on some of the neighboring countries as well. We need to get out of that. We need to definitely promote R&D. We need to look at making very precise technology and manufacturing investments to make sure that we localize our supply chain. If I talk about renewable, I think when it comes to solar plants, each of the equipment which goes into it, like the solar panels, the technology needed to improve the efficiency of solar panels, and even the new technologies which will come, which will potentially improve efficiency, have to come from our country. The wind turbines, India will have a huge advantage with such a vast country. We have access to abundant wind. We need to get ahead of the curve and improve our technologies there. We need to look at battery technologies. We need to, if a young engineer out there, batteries will become immersive. A lot of research work and work needs to go there to both localize and improve efficiency and cost of how battery storage will come into play. And then digital and AI, I think, lo and behold, I think infrastructure will be a big consumer of digital technology. And, we need to take the, implicit strength of our country and bring it to infra as well and improve efficiency and productivity there.
Mr. Chatterjee, would you like to come in on the technology part of it as to what are the kind of tech breakthroughs we should hope for?
Technology is important, but I'm going to take a step back and say that the bulk of fresh infrastructure in this country will happen in urban areas or semi-urban or peri-urban areas. Right. It's a fact of life that in a society that is gradually migrating from a rural existence and migrating wholesale to cities. The problem is that at the core of fresh infra or even redoing existing infra is this profession called master planning. We have some eminent architects sitting here. Gurpreet is there, and I'm sure there are many others in the room. The master planning of our urban agglomerations is a vastly underrated profession and practice. And we are suffering because of that. And this is not to blame either I think all sections of society are responsible. The political class, the bureaucratic class that run town and country planning offices or city master plans, or even civil society that does not stand up to say that you cannot build unless there is an approved master plan which has a societal sanction. We have failed as a country to appreciate the profession and practice of scientific master planning of our urban agglomerations. If you are planning a suburban, if you are planning and giving permissions for buildings, townships, factories, ports, airports. How many times are you factoring in effluent disposal, solid waste management, last mile connectivity on transportation, and all the parking and all these issues which are often coming after the development is over once you face a crisis. So the point I'm trying to make is that it is about time that the urban ministry set up a very strong practice, permeated down to state levels to say that India requires a separate recognition, profession, practice, and implementation of world-class urban planning standards, period.
Indeed, and that's a long-standing demand that citizens now want that policymakers should be addressing. I'm afraid I'm completely out of time. It's a fascinating discussion, many threads still left, but I guess that's the whole point. During the course of this evening, we will try and touch upon remaining aspects of this discussion. Thank you so much to this panel, and a big round of applause for this wonderful panel. And let's get a photograph, please. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Yes.